Part 4. A few days had gone by since my episode of amusement. I had been assigned some more papers to copy, if I could manage, and manage I could, so I sat comfortably at the table in the study, typing and writing away. Most of the papers could be copied on a typewriter, but there were a few with graphs that I needed to hand sketch. I feel my best when I am of use, so I happily worked away, the younger Holmes having left me to my own devices for the time being, on the assumption that I was not needed elsewhere for the moment. I was thus occupied when Mary and the man in question entered the study. "I don't see why she needs to be present. Can't you just inform her when you're finished?" "Mary, she is a grown woman. If she needed you to coddle her, I'm sure she would ask for it. Dr. Watson." I glanced up at him as he addressed me. "The sergeant who was on duty that night is on his way. I'm not happy with how long it took to get him here, but Lestrade's excuses shall hold us back no longer. If you will accompany me to the sitting room, I would like to have you settled before he arrives." I nodded. "Of course, these papers can wait." I put away my pen and took Holmes' proffered hand to stand up. I let out a sigh. It would be some time before my health would be ideal again. Before we left the study, it occurred to me to grab the pencil I used to jot notes in my diary, and the book itself. I generally prefer the old-fashioned method of writing upon loose paper, then binding the pages together, but I knew that would be useless at the front, and had switched to the more fashionable leather book. Holmes glanced down in approval as we made our way to the sitting room. Once Holmes had me settled onto the sofa in the room, he lit his pipe. My face twitched. In America, it was considered a rather unwholesome and dirty habit to smoke. I was never certain it was unchristian, as some groups seemed to claim it to be, as it did always seem to be the women in the church who said that. Considering it was they who had to clean the ash from the curtains and windows, I could understand if they truly believed it to be sinful, despite the lack of evidence I had observed. Regardless, I agreed that it was a dirty habit. Unfortunately, it was commonplace in Europe, so I resigned myself to say nothing. Holmes must have noticed my twitch despite my silence, because he did raise a brow, likely because he knew enough of American sentiments to recognize them in me. There was a knock at the door, and one of the younger maids informed us of the sergeant's arrival. He was an average-sized man, a little taller than me in height, with dirty blonde hair and brown eyes. He looked in age to be a little older than Holmes, and he carried himself with a high degree of confidence. "Sergeant J.B. Birch, sir. Inspector Lestrade said you needed to speak with me." His eyes slid past Holmes and alighted upon me. I had already begun to take down his words, but feeling the gaze, I looked up. His face was crossed with confusion and concern when Holmes spoke. "Yes, I need to speak with you about the night you discovered the body of Mr. Enoch Drebber. This," he gestured toward me, "is Dr. Johanna Watson. She is representing the Red Cross upon this matter, and you may speak freely in front of her." Recognition bloomed in the man's eyes, and he rudely walked past Holmes to offer me his hand. "Well, I'll be damned if I'm not pleased to meet you, ma'am." I took his offered hand, confused. "I'm sorry, do we know each other?" He shook his head. "No, but you and your fellows at Paschadale are the reason my brother is alive. Do you remember him? Simon Birch." "I'm sorry, I was so focused upon my work I really didn't have time to learn names." He smiled. "Well, no matter that. He would surely like to meet you, though. He said he always wished he could see the face of the angel that saved him again. May I bring him?" I, being a bit dumbfounded, just nodded. "Of course, but we really should get back to the matter at hand." Holmes seemed annoyed, and I didn't blame him. The man had just ignored all rules of decorum, and even I had to admit it made things rather uncomfortable. He grinned and loosed my hand as he sat down across from me. "Wonderful! I'll tell you everything I know, Mr. Holmes." Holmes had made his way behind the sofa where I sat, I suppose not to be undone by the man. Though I couldn't see it, I could hear the annoyance in his voice as he spoke. "Just the facts, please, Mr. Birch." Sergeant Birch launched into his story, seemingly unaware of the dig from my companion, and I did my best to write down his story word for word. It was late. I had just been shifted to night watch, you know. With how thin our forces are, everyone has been getting moved around and assigned strange hours. So I was real tired, having just shifted, though I think I've been doing all right at staying alert. The bombing seems to help with that. Anyway, I was making my way around and turned down Brixton Road. There aren't a lot of people living there at the moment, but those that do don't always follow the blackout laws. That was how I found the body, you know, the candle that was left burning. Holmes had moved to stand in front of the fireplace, but I saw a glimpse of something cross his face. "No, we were not told that." The sergeant shook his head. Well, I included it in my report, but I guess they forgot." "Who blew out the candle?" Both men glanced at me in mild surprise, as I had been quietly taking notes up to this point. "I did. I'll get there momentarily. Anyway, I was making my way down the road when I saw a light in one of the windows. There was a ladder leading up to it, so I assumed that the landlord was making some repairs and left a lamp burning. I was about to go inquire when this heavy-stooped chap starts singing and making his way down the road toward me. I asked him why he was out and about, and he slurred something about the pub. Of course, I'm not that stupid, Mr. Holmes. Most of the nearby pubs had been closed for hours by then. Naturally, I figured the sop had some private supply. It's not all that uncommon, so I helped him when he stumbled and nearly fell, and walked him back to the other street, where he exclaimed, 'There's my house!' As drunk as he was, he had walked right past it. He had a key to the gate, so I left him to get inside on his own after redirecting him while I went to attend to the lit window. It really is dangerous, you know." He accompanied this statement with a reaffirming nod. I knocked on the door of the housing for a while with no result, so I began to think that the owner had forgot the burning light and left the house. Could have burnt the place down. I decided to just go ahead and climb up the ladder and in through the window. Jumped in and found the man. Didn't notice the blood on the wall. I was told about that later. Anyway, he was quite dead, so I blew out the candle, then left to inform the lads. One of the chaps who came to investigate the body recognized him, and you were called in the next day. That's all I know." Holmes nodded. "Thank you for this information. I believe that will be all." The sergeant nodded and stood. "Of course, sir." He turned to me. "Would it be all right for my brother and I to call upon you later, Dr. Watson? I know that he would be overjoyed to see you." I nodded. "I'm staying here indefinitely, so please do." He gave a salute. "Goodbye, Doctor. Mr. Holmes." He left, and I finished up my notes, while Holmes sat deep into the chair the sergeant had occupied, and began to brood. Or so it appeared. He became silent and continued to smoke, for he had never stopped that entire interview. I was about to make my escape from the smoke. 15 minutes was far more than enough time to wait for him to address me, but as I made ready my escape, he finally spoke. "Watson, do let me see your notes." I handed him the book, seeing no harm in it. He glanced over the notes, then frowned and handed me back the book. "You may leave. I need to think." I, being all too happy to escape the smoke, stood and made my way out of the room. Later that same day, in the afternoon, I was seated in the study when Mr. Holmes came in and pulled a book from the shelf. I paid him no mind, so distracted was I in attempting to read the bodice ripper Mary insisted I finish, so that we could discuss it. That's when one of the servants came in and addressed Holmes. "Old man's here to see you, sir. Says it's about a ring." Holmes nodded. "Sent him in." I started to pay attention at that point and adjusted to make myself presentable. Holmes nodded at me in approval. I couldn't tell you just what I expected the owner of the ring to look like, but I was quite surprised. An old man, half stooped over, limped into the room. Holmes showed no reaction. "Are you Mr. Holmes?" The old man held up the paper with the ad Holmes had placed, encircled. "I am. Since you are here for the ring, would you mind giving me a description of it and telling me where exactly you lost it?" The old man nodded. "The ring is small and silver with wild roses carved into it, the kind you would find in America, you know. I bought it for my Lottie when I married her in New England." The old man began huffing in the way many do when they are holding back tears. "I lost it right along the road you found it on, I think. I can't really be sure. I'm a door knocker, you know. I'd realized that I'd lost it only a few days ago. I always kept it in my pocket since Lottie died." His eyes had really begun to tear up, and I began to wonder if the ring had ever belonged to the killer. Perhaps Stangerson had found it along the road after all, the same way Holmes had claimed to? I always keep it in my coat, and I was so worried when I discovered it missing. I feared that I would never see it again. Then I saw your ad in the paper and hoped that maybe, just maybe, you had my Lottie's ring." Holmes smiled and pulled the ring out of his pocket. "Here you are, and do try to be more careful. I know that I would be devastated if I lost a precious memory of my wife." The old man then acknowledged me as he took the ring. "A pretty one you are. Remind me of my Lottie. Bless you and your husband." The man then turned to make his way out of the room, and Holmes waited, agitated. The old man's comment left me taken aback. Certainly the sweater had made it obvious that I was female. But had he really assumed me to be the wife of a Holmes? I was about to verify what had just happened when Sherlock Holmes ran out of the room, not long after the old man, leaving me confused and alone. Later on, some papers from the Cross were delivered, and I busied myself with copying them down. I had explained to Mary what occurred, and asked if she knew where Holmes had run off to. She smiled as though it were obvious. "Why, to follow the old man, of course." I asked no further questions. If the old man were a liar, I wondered what could have gotten him to act on behalf of the real owner of the ring. Money seemed most probable. With this settled, I worked on for at least 2 hours. I had nearly completed the copies when Holmes burst in, obviously excited. "Watson, you will never believe what I have found!" I stared at him, waiting for him to elaborate. I did not play the praise me game with my grandmother, and I would not play it with him. I tailed our visitor for a few blocks, only to see him straighten up with a stretch. Impressive makeup. He must be part of a theater company. He then hailed a taxi and hopped inside, which I did my best to follow, but lost track of, eventually. I did, however, get the plates, so inquiries will be made. With this last statement, he left the room, likely to brag to someone more interested. In spite of what I saw as a bit of a failure, Holmes seemed rather chipper. That night, well after the supper-time hour, I was reading once more the romance garbage inflicted upon me by Mary. She had insisted that I would love the book, and wanting to humor her, I was doing my best to suffer through it. I had made it through yet another dramatic scene where the leading lady's best friend betrayed her when I heard a whirring sound. I paused and listened carefully. There it was. I could clearly hear a quite distinct whirring. I stood, walked out into the hallway, and followed the sound. It became louder as I made my way down the hall, and I remembered what it was. A sewing machine. It seemed Mrs. Hudson must be working on a garment for the baby. Ever since she had arrived, she had busied herself working and preparing things with Mary. I decided to see if she wanted any help. While I was no seamstress, I could do minor handwork. It would be an excuse not to read that embarrassing book as well. I approached the door where the sound originated. It was open, so I knocked upon the frame as I stepped through. To my surprise, it was not Mrs. Hudson who sat at the machine, but Sherlock Holmes. I openly stared, so taken aback that I had no idea how much time actually passed. Of all things, he was sewing! "Do close the door, Watson. You're letting in a draft." I did as requested. "What are you doing?" His foot stopped working the treadle, and he looked at me as if I were stupid. "Sewing a skirt, though I suppose what you really meant was, why am I sewing a skirt?" I nodded, and he shook his head. "Spending time with you in—" He paused and looked me over. "That is something of a distraction. It wouldn't be so bad without the corset, but with it—" He made a face of disgust. "This," he gestured at the skirt, "is short enough that it shouldn't trip you, and will pair much better with those sweaters my sister insists on putting you in." I was more confused and felt as though I had been insulted. "Do sit down before you hurt yourself, Watson." He gestured to the chair beside him, then once more began pedaling. "Why do you know how to sew?" I had found my words and determined I would make use of them. "I'm a detective, Watson." He said this as if it explained everything, and I was uncertain how to get him to clarify. He suddenly sighed. "Your confusion is palpable, Dr. Watson. To answer what your real question is, there are times when I have to go undercover. When I do, I need garments that not only fit me, but make me look like someone else entirely. It is much easier to make them myself than it is to commission them from a tailor and convince him not to question strange requests." So that was the reason then. It made sense, and it calmed me to know. Seeing him sew had caught me off guard, but at least there was a logical reason for it. "Wait a moment. The skirt is for me?" Holmes let out a long and weary sigh. "Doctor, do keep up. I cannot stand to be in your presence with you dressed like that. This skirt will fix the problem." I took a closer look at what he was sewing. It was a brown wool that looked quite soft, but as I looked closer, I realized just how short it was. "Can't we just convince Mary to let me wear men's shirts again?" "No." I began to grow agitated. "Oh, Mr. Holmes, I'll look like a child. You can't possibly tell me that it's better I look like a child than a man." Holmes stopped the machine and gave me an incredulous look. "Watson, you walk with a limp and are clearly malnourished. You're hardly going to be mistaken for a child." I was about to protest once more when I realized that this man couldn't actually make me wear the thing. The thought would have calmed me if he hadn't continued his statement. "I will be giving it to Mary as she does help you dress." Fear shot through me. "You wouldn't." He raised a brow and I slumped into my chair. "Enough with the theatrics, Dr. Watson. Even if you were correct in your assumption that you would be mistaken for a child, it's still better than what you're currently wearing. Besides, you know as well as I do that as long as you are in Mary's power, you will not be allowed to wear a man's shirt. She told me where she hid them, and it is well out of your reach." I sighed. He was right. "Still, it's strange that you would make a skirt for me. We're all but strangers." "Mary is fond of you, Watson. Besides, as I said, I have an image to maintain, and I can't have you breaking with it, even if it is Mary's fault in the end." I scoffed. Mary's fault indeed. Well, thank you then. I resigned myself to the fact that this man was the male counterpart to my grandmother. It seemed that I would have to use the same methods to get along with him as with her. I regretted this conclusion the next day when Mary put me in the skirt. Looking myself over in the mirror, I couldn't help but notice the similarity to an angry cat that can't bring itself to harm its mistress. The brown skirt would have been becoming, had I been healthy, or 12. As it was, I looked like a gaunt orphan in hand-me-down clothes. I gazed longingly at my trousers, which I could see in the mirror. If only I could obtain my shirts again, then I wouldn't have to put up with this ridiculousness. I was hardly the only woman in London to wear trousers. All those who took up factory work in their menfolk's stead did so, though those women did not reside in the homes of British elites. I had made up my mind to get back home as swiftly as possible. Submarines be damned. You look adorable. Mary was palpably excited as she finished tying a bow in my hair, this time a bright red to contrast the brown skirt and tan sweater, as she had said. I desperately tried to come up with something nice to say, but there was a knock on the door that saved me. Mary called them in, and there was Jonathan, whose face looked about as impressed as my own when he saw me. Ah, Mary, Mrs. Hudson wants to ask you about one of the baby dresses. Do go and speak with her. I'll escort Dr. Watson down to breakfast. I breathed a sigh of relief as she left. Excitable, that one. Jonathan nodded and looked me up and down. He was holding something behind his back. You know, if you weren't so weak and haggard. I cut him off. I would look even more like a child. You don't need to sugarcoat the truth. I am a doctor, too. I mean, look at this. I gestured to the very visible black stockings showing beneath my skirt. I haven't worn a skirt so short since I was 12. Wells gave me a bemused look. Well, I suppose if you're that accepting of the truth, you don't really need this. From behind his back he produced a white laboratory coat, one which was clearly capable of covering my form. I snatched it from his hands. Bless you! Overjoyed, I slipped it on, buttoning it as best I could. Wells just laughed. I know all too well that we need to maintain some form of dignity as doctors. I couldn't just stand idly by as Holmes and Mary made you their own little model. I grimaced. You don't think it would come to that? Wells gravely shook his head. They both love fashion, Dr. Watson. Mary held back while you were bedridden, but now that you're up and about, she won't, and with Holmes here, I shudder to think what they will put you through if you're not careful. Wells had led me to the hallway as he spoke, making our way to the dining room. His words made the darker halls seem colder, and a nervousness crept through me. I would have said something to break the silence, but I was suddenly cut off. Watson! I gasped and would have struck out were it not for Jonathan firmly holding my arm. He seemed equally as alarmed, more so by my reaction than Holmes' sudden appearance, and patted my back as I tried to calm myself. Holmes, I keep telling you not to do that. Watson and I were both on the front. You could give either of us a heart attack. My face was fully flushed. I couldn't believe that I let something so silly startle me so badly. He glanced over my gasping form. You may have already. I shook my head and held up a hand. In my attempt to calm down, I had stooped over and likely looked a fright. Holmes, unperturbed by my reaction, glanced me over. I was still wearing men's boots, as there was nothing else that I could walk in, but I suppose the rest of me suited his impression of respectability as he gave a nod of approval. I hardly think that one little scare will do either of you in, Jonathan, particularly as it's your own fault for aggravating the good doctor with all the horrors that Mary and I will subject her to. Wells shot Holmes an annoyed glare. Well, it's true. Holmes nodded in assent. Yes, I'm sure before she leaves, Dr. Watson will be assaulted with many fashionable pieces that her country upbringing did not provide for her. I squinted, then shook it off. I knew enough to know that if I asked him how he knew I grew up in the country, it would turn into an instructional lecture. Instead, I opted for what I thought was the safe option. Where on earth did you come from? It was not, in fact, the safe option.